Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As the program indicates, my name is Gerald Thompson. I used to be the director of the Treaties Division in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And while there, I had responsibility for matters concerning the law of the sea, treaties generally, and specifically the responsibility for managing the preparation of Trinidad and Tobago's submission to the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, by which we seek to extend our continental shelf jurisdiction beyond 200 nautical miles from the territorial sea baselines. Trinidad and Tobago made its submission to the Commission in 2009. We presented formally to the Commission that submission in 2010. And the Commission has queued Trinidad and Tobago's submission for consideration, or at that time, queued the submission for consideration at a later time. When we submitted the submission in 2009, we were the 49th state, the 49th coastal state to make a submission. And at the time, the feeling was that it would be at least a couple of decades before the submission came up for consideration. Happily, it has not taken that long. The Commission has looked to its methods. It has worked more intensively, so that the likelihood is that a subcommission to consider the Trinidad and Tobago submission will be established in the not too distant future. The indications are that that subcommission will be established this year. The subcommission, and the reason for that, in addition to the Commission working more intensively, a number of states ahead of us in the queue who would normally have had their submissions considered before Trinidad and Tobago's have had, for one reason or the other, to ask that their submission be stood down so that others may come forward in the queue. The Commission has the responsibility to decide whether a coastal state can extend its continental shelf jurisdiction beyond 200 nautical miles from the territorial sea baselines. Most states, as you know, or coastal states that is, right, have the possibility of enjoying a 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone and the continental shelf that underlies that exclusive economic zone. It is what is called in the literature, it's a legal shelf. It's not a geological or geomorphological shelf. It's a legal shelf. So it means that whether you have a shelf or not, the UNCLOS would accord to a coastal state a continental shelf up to 200 miles, nautical miles. That shelf would underlie the exclusive economic zone, underlie the water column, the superadjacent waters, over which the state would have exclusive rights to the living and non-living resources. So the CLCS, the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, deals with jurisdiction of coastal states who wish to extend their jurisdiction beyond 200 nautical miles, as far as the jurisdiction of the International Seabed Authority, which has responsibility for the area under UNCLOS. So the Commission is concerned with the jurisdiction over the continental shelf between 200 up to the area, and that is delineated, the area the area beyond which the Seabed Authority would have jurisdiction. That is delineated by the Commission indicating what are the outer limits of a coastal state's. The outer limits of a coastal state's continental margin. So we submitted our submission in 2009, presented in 2010, and it will come up for consideration by the establishment of a subcommission in the very near future. In treating with the issue of the submission to the Commission, it is useful as well to consider how we got here. And how we got here has a lot to do with the process of delimitation within the, delimitation generally, particularly delimitation within the Southern Caribbean, and the use made by states of the equidistance method. States, as you know, delimit because they're under legal obligation to do so. Articles 74 and 83 of UNCLOS, dealing respectively with the exclusive economic zone and the continental shelf, requires that states delimit their overlapping maritime spaces. And you would delimit your overlapping maritime spaces only if you cannot get to 200 nautical miles. And when you look at the map of the region, you will see that except for a few states, our continental neighbors in South America, CARICOM neighbors, that is, Guyana and Suriname, and Barbados, the rest of the states, the rest of the member states of the Caribbean community are really challenged to get anywhere near 200 nautical miles. And that is because they are so very close together. Here we have a pictorial representation of what the situation is with respect to delimitation in the Southern Caribbean. The solid red lines are settled boundaries, and the dashed lines are notional equidistance lines. And what that indicates, of course, is that within that area, right, states are not going to get anywhere near 200 nautical miles for their own exclusive economic zone, and therefore they will have to delimit. The method used is important. Now, the equidistance method is commonly used in delimitation. It is commonly used, but of course it is not an obligatory method. It is commonly used because very often it produces what is an equitable result. The law requires that a boundary cannot be unilateral, it must be agreed. So the boundary must be agreed. It must be agreed in accordance with international law, and it should lead to an equitable solution. Right? Those are the three criteria with respect to the delimitation of the exclusive economic zone and the continental shelf. With respect to the territorial sea, the default is a median line. You would have to have very good reasons why you would want to depart from a median line in delimiting the territorial sea. I said the delimitation is important in the context of the submission to the Commission, because when we negotiated the boundary with Venezuela, the boundary was settled in 1990. It is, when you look at it, it's largely, and you can see, right? This is the boundary, a particularly long boundary, right? It's largely an equidistance boundary, but it departs from the equidistance in particular respects, or in particular areas. Certainly, it departs from the equidistance it maintains equidistance in the territorial sea, and in so doing, it departed from the old 1942 Gulf of Paria Treaty. The Gulf of Paria Treaty, negotiated by the United Kingdom as the colonial power at the time, and Venezuela, which really sought to protect certain hydrocarbon interests Trinidad and Tobago had at the time. So the boundary ran around Soldado Rock, right? And in the Columbus Channel, it was really closer to Venezuela than it is to Trinidad and Tobago. And in the Columbus Channel, it is territorial sea. Sorry, in the Columbus Channel, neither state can get their full 12-mile territorial sea, and therefore you have to delimit. If you're delimiting in that context, then the default really is a median line. And for that reason, in the context of an agreement with Venezuela to settle the maritime boundary between the two states, one could not maintain, right, the seabed line. So one cannot maintain the line on the 1942 seabed line in the context of a delimitation of the territorial sea, which would have covered both the seabed and subsoil, as well as the superadjacent water column. And so I make the point that there was an adjustment of the 42 treaty in that area to make it accord with a median line. And there were other adjustments as well. There were adjustments in the north, around opposite Patos. Right? There were adjustments in the south as well of the southeast coast, because it was realized that some of the oil fields which were being exploited by Trinidad and Tobago at the time, particularly the Cape Hawk field, actually fell south of an equidistant line. And therefore, if you wanted to maintain that line, you would certainly need to negotiate it. And of course, very likely there'd be some trade-off as well. This boundary, right, has an interesting feature. You see here, it is a step up. That step up was to avoid a tri-point between Trinidad and Tobago, Venezuela, and Guyana. We stepped up, or the negotiators stepped up, right? The tri-point would be a few miles in advance of that. The pullback stepped up, and the line continued on an azimuth, I think, of some 70 degrees. The point here is that it was a concession to Venezuela, in the context of the whole boundary, a concession to Venezuela for what they regard, what they were seeking as an egress to the Atlantic. It was made clear, of course, that Trinidad and Tobago, given its limited EZ, could not, of course, grant Venezuela or an egress to the Atlantic, and of course, they needed to treat with the Guyanese. But it was a contribution that Trinidad and Tobago was prepared to make in the context of the settlement of those negotiations, which I might add allowed for the secure exploitation of the gas resources of the southeast coast of Trinidad and Tobago. It is the exploitation of those gas resources that is responsible for the economic prosperity that Trinidad and Tobago enjoyed, certainly when the price of gas was high, when the price of oil was high. The line also went beyond 200. The feeling of the negotiators was that they were secure in the knowledge that this was a boundary which extended beyond 200 nautical miles into the extended shelf, and the line went beyond 200. So that point 22 is about 223 miles from the coast. And the agreement said that the parties, if they discover that the continental margin was closer to 350 than to 223, then they would negotiate that extension. I say that in the context as well of recent developments when the Venezuelan government issued a decree 1787, in response to the Exxon find of Guyana, and the effect of that was to the effect of that really was to unilaterally extend the boundary way beyond the 223 unilaterally, and also beyond 350. So we have an idea of the kind of boundaries in the region. You see the metropolitan powers, the French, the Dutch, and the Americans have concluded agreements with Venezuela regarding this island, Aves Island. Aves Island really is, to call it an island is being generous. But the metropolitan powers agreed to treat it as an island and to give it the full effect. That is, to treat it as having the right to a 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone on the continental shelf. You see what Aves Island is like. Yes. So that the effect of that was to, using again equidistance, and in this case I suppose one could argue equidistance in a bad way, was to prejudice the interests of the independent states nearby, the CARICOM states, St. Kitts, Dominica, and those states, because the United States, the Netherlands, and France, right, having recognized Aves as being an island, then of course the Venezuelan authorities would come to those countries in their negotiations and say, then, if they can do it, really, what's the problem? Why do you have a problem? Right. So, Aves Island is an example of the equidistance method being used, but not to produce an equitable result, certainly not so far as the neighboring states are concerned. Now, we have, we have had a couple of delimitations which have been settled by arbitration in the region. Of course, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados in 2006, Guyana, Suriname in 2007. There are some outstanding that are worthy of note. There is, of course, the Guyana-Venezuela boundary that's outstanding. Sorry. And the Grenada-Venezuela boundary that is outstanding. And let me say, when there is attention directed to Venezuela, it is not to suggest that it is not necessarily a negative attention. Venezuela is easily, right, the state with the longest coastline in the Southern Caribbean and the state with the largest exclusive economic zone. But it is also true that in respect of its situation in Guyana, it suffers from the effect of equidistance. So it benefited from equidistance with respect to Aves Island, but equidistance really hinders it with respect to Guyana. This is what an equidistance line does. This is an equidistance line between Guyana and Venezuela. It cuts Venezuela off, right, well within 200 nautical miles. And of course, the Venezuelans would wish to go out, and they would wish to also be able to make a claim to the extended continental shelf. In order to do that, they would need to convince the Guyanese that really this is not a case where equidistance is equitable. Right? While they would be resisting the efforts of St. Kitts and others in the north of the sector to convince them that equidistance is not equitable with respect to Aves Island. Here in the south, right, the shoe is on the other foot, and they would be saying to the Guyanese, this is not equitable, given the size of our coastline that projects onto this area, we should be allowed an access. And really, if one were to, and it's very likely that if a third party would adjudicate on that matter, that the third party is not likely to say that Venezuela would end here, given its coastline that fronts on the area. But Venezuela, of course, will not allow a third party to settle the matter, and therefore they depend on. They want to keep it within the political realm of discussions and negotiation, or bilateral negotiations. With respect to the Trinidad and Tobago submission to the Continental Shelf, in presenting the submission, we needed to secure, in accordance to the rules of the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, we need to secure essentially no objections from the neighboring states. And we secured no objections from Venezuela, no objection from Guyana, no objection from Suriname. And so on that basis, we could say confidently to the Commission that there is no dispute with any of the neighboring states in respect of this particular area. And we also took the position that the commission, the arbitral commission that settled the Trinidad and Tobago Barbados boundary, settled the matter up to 200 and did not deal with the extended shelf. And so the commission on that basis queued it for consideration as being a submission that met the criteria set out in Article 76 for consideration by the commission on the limits of the continental shelf. With respect to what lessons we might take from how the countries, the coastal states have dealt with delimitation thus far, the commission will set the limits. The commission will set the limits of the outer limits of Trinidad and Tobago's continental shelf. Right? This is an example. This is a representation of what has been presented to the commission. But all the commission is doing here, right, is delineating where national jurisdiction ends and where the jurisdiction of the International Seabed Authority begins. It is still left for the states concerned, all these states that in fact whose jurisdictions impinge on this area. It is still left for those states. You can see it here. Venezuelans coming out, Trinidad and Tobago coming out, the Guyanese coming out, Suriname coming out. It is still left for those states to negotiate how to treat with that maritime space, that area of extended continental shelf. And certainly in that area, an equidistance method will not lead to a solution. So, and also, right, it is very likely that, not very likely, it's possible that it is in this area, in treating with this issue, if we get to that point, that a solution to the Guyanese Venezuelan issue may lie. Because it is very, very unlikely that there will be any cession of any land territory in that dispute. In fact, Guyana has made it very clear that will not happen. But it's very possible, or it may be possible to treat with the same issue, right, in the maritime sphere. And that in fact, as a concession to Guyana in the maritime sphere, that one may have a resolution of the difficulty regarding what the Guyanese call the controversy with respect to the Essequibo region. And of course, it's an important distinction because all that one hears about the Essequibo is a challenge by Venezuela to the validity of the 1899 arbitral award. And that's why the Guyanese call it a controversy. It is not a territorial dispute, it's a controversy because the Venezuelans are challenging the validity of the arbitral award. They're not challenging the right of Guyana to hold and to have the Essequibo as part of its territory. On the basis of the 1966 Geneva Agreement, Guyana became independent with the Essequibo as part of its territory, recognized by all states as being part of its territory. That is the status quo. What is the dispute as to whether the arbitral award is invalid, whether any fraud occurred, such as would render it a nullity. If that were to happen, then of course legally you would then have to go back, as it were, to the beginning, right? and to decide how the land space is to be apportioned. In this regard, of course, it is sometimes forgotten that the Venezuelans claimed the Essequibo, but the British, on behalf of the Guyanese, claimed all the way up to the Orinoco Delta, all where the Venezuela has all these large, huge deposits of heavy oil. That was claimed by the British back in 1899. And the tribunal decided that the British claim was a bit too much, and they decided that the Venezuelan claim was a bit too much. And that's where it ended. I say in the context of the submissions to the Commission on the Limits of the Shelf, the Guyanese have made a submission. We have a no objection agreement with them, Suriname as well. There's a challenge certainly to the CARICOM member states to ensure that as we go forward with respect to the development of the resources of the extended shelf, of course, we need first possibly to delimit and to ensure that really that process moves a little more smoothly than perhaps the process in respect of the EZ boundaries have moved thus far. Thank you.